Earlier, I was talking with Dr. Fagan about a study that he released on marriage rates in the Black community. There's so much in the news about white privilege that his organization looked at Black privilege to see that what happens when Black children are raised with married parents. And we saw that there are some benefits in this area. And so, Dr. Allen, I want to ask you first, because so much is in the headlines. We just saw the Supreme Court rule that LGBTQ should be added to Civil Rights Act. We hear the noise of the street marchers, or the domestic terrorists, as I like to call them, because they keep saying that they're about social justice. But family and marriage gets a little bit of attention. What did you see and gained from the report that Dr. Fagan did?
Well, I saw two things right away. One of them reminded me of what often happens when one has a young child, a baby. The baby cries, and you're at a loss to explain why the baby's crying. And so you have to search, and you find always it's some particular thing. His research pointed in that direction for me. When we tend today to talk in terms of macro or aggregate statistics, which never explain anything. It is the micro-social statistics. Hidden within the aggregate are details. And that's what I saw in the work that he was doing, for example, when he identified a great deal of dysfunction in the Black family in the Midwest, which immediately said to me, this sounds like the historical pattern of migration effect. Whether you're leaving Egypt and you're the Hebrew children, or whether you're leaving Europe to come to the United States and you're Irish or something else, the great migration that took place in the United States in the 1920s moved first of all to the Midwest, where the center of this non-intact families is found. And I thought, there's a link here, which if we dive into the statistics, we can discover, instead of simply talking about race at the macro level.
Right. Well, then how do we address the family then and breakdown? Because what you're bringing to the table is, okay, the men went first to find work to then bring family later. But I don't know that there's been a place in history where we saw such a insistence on not marrying the mother of the children. And that's one of the things that I saw from your report. I want you to elaborate on it, but Henry, I also want to ask you, I'll let Dr. Fagan elaborate in a minute, because we've just heard from him a little bit. I want to hear from you in some of the research that you have seen, because you're looking at these ethical questions in your public policy research as well. There's a tendency, especially from conservatives and the right, to say family breakdown is what's creating a lot of this moral chaos. And now we have a different issue on the table. Can you explain to us where we can find a little truth here?
Well, I think that one of the things we have to recognize is something Dr. Fagan spoke about, which is it's the living with both biological parents that produces the beneficial outcomes. And conservatives can learn to talk in that language rather than in some of the language that seems to castigate different types of families that are not traditional married families, but in which both parents, whether they're divorced or in some other way, actually do contribute actively and responsibly to the raising of their children. In that way, conservatives can make a base on family formation rather than something that would come across to other ears as more theological or dogmatic. And that would be a way to build and gain ground rather than to reiterate a losing position.
Well, if it's a losing position, because Dr. Fagan, I've seen much of your work, even in the past, where you show that we should have discussions about chastity in marriage, because it is important that we keep a civil society as a result of those patterns that grow when we have community, because it first starts the passing of virtues in that household.
Well, I think the short answer is yes. But given the modern situation that we're in, where a lot of people, as Dr. Wilson has just said, have different views on sexuality, that where I think things are going is that there's a way to form children so that they're going to end up married. Chastity's got a lot to do with it. Not everybody agrees with that anymore. Most people do, but not everybody. And there are different forms of sexuality that some people are pushing. What I think is needed now, given the Supreme Court ruling, is that the intact married family that worships weekly, that wants to raise the children chastely, be regarded as a sexual group and get the very same rights as every other sexual group is getting, that it not be discriminated against.
Oh my goodness.
As actually it is massively discriminated against in public education.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
And it's interesting, even in the public square. In fact, I hear a retreat from some of the language about the both of you. Dr. Allen, I'm just wondering, should we just give in to this notion that, well, people can choose whichever path they want and live and express that in the public square, and then we're just going to carve out all of these special interests for each of the people group? How are we going to solve this?
Well, certainly we can't just give in, because disorder is not civil order, and we have to preserve civil order. But I would like to remind everyone that the Bostock decision, the most recent Supreme Court decision on these issues, didn't create a protected class of transgender or sexual orientation. It was very explicit in the Gorsuch opinion that the male, as a biological male, was not treated without regard to gender, i.e., a female doing what he did would not have been treated the way he was treated. That was the basis of the decision. Right. So they didn't actually create a protected status for sexual orientation in the case.
But some are saying that it did open the door now for this Equality Act that's been going through, or actually already passed at the House, and now is going to the Senate for more discussion to say, we're really close now to just saying that you can choose whatever sexual patterns you want to display them in the public square, and religion has to be quiet about these questions. I'm not sure that this is a good idea for us as a civil society, or a society trying to work at least together.
I think the thing that we have to, in dealing with the response to Bostock, is recognize the centrality of the First Amendment in this, which is that the First Amendment is really an ingenious, short set of words that establishes the freedom to speak, the freedom to write, and the freedom to think, which is what is really enshrined with the freedom of religion, which is a freedom of conscience. And then we have things that permit our freedom to act on those things, the freedom of free exercise, the freedom to assemble, and the freedom to petition the government. Taken together, what that means is that you cannot constitutionally and consistently with our regime make people confess to something they don't believe in, or prevent them from forming institutions to advance their beliefs. Well, so what that means is that we need to protect that which protects religion, protects the civil society, protects the nuclear family from the discrimination that some are seeking to bring upon it.
But we haven't seen that at all. We've seen expansion of government in areas where people don't think government belongs. We saw in the welfare state, which some say created this opportunity to break down family. When you're paying people not to work or to marry or to make quality decisions, then more people tend to move into those life patterns. And on this particular question, we already saw the rulings and the law say that we were going to protect religious liberties, but yet keep going to the court with bakers who do not want to bake cakes for specific expressions. I'm just not sure that this question can be settled because it seems like we're talking two world views. So Dr. Fagan, I want to ask you, because your work has always pointed to family and tradition. How are we going to maintain a civil order surrounding religion and those that want to practice and believe what the scriptures say in a secular environment that now says that we can add all kinds of alphabets to the Civil Rights Act?
Well, I don't think the future looks good, to be quite honest, because the infrastructure, the intellectual and the legal, and in turn the constitutional infrastructure is premised on two things. A religious people, without any forcing people to be religious, but they were all across the West. People were by and large religious and married. Those two things are intertwined in the weave and woof of the culture. Those things have been deliberately targeted essentially since the French Revolution, most particularly since Marx and Engels, and very successfully. That's another whole discourse. And now you see the fruit of, we now have a society, a culture, not just a society, not just the Constitution of the US, but the infrastructure below it is crumbling. It took, it took about 1,000 years to move from pagan Rome to the Renaissance with this gradual building of this weave and woof of worship and marriage. Now, people didn't set out to come up with a constitution. They didn't even set up to have a married society. That was a byproduct of a way of living.
Right, but
so if you don't want the way of living, you're not going to get this byproduct.
And you pointed to your own study that showed now 46% are buying into this way of living. I'm concerned, Dr. Allen, I'm very concerned that if we buy this idea that I'm hearing expressed that, well, this is just the trend of culture, that we could end up with a non-religious society, even more so than we are, all of the institutions broken, which is going to open the door for bigger government. So my question becomes, is this a battle worth fighting for the clergy community to say, we want to reverse some of these trends, or should they just carve out space for themselves in a secular society?
It's the only space in which moral authority can operate. A space in which we say there's no liberty without responsibility, no responsibility without liberty. So that it is not the question of ritualizing certain indexical steps towards stability, but holding people directly responsible for their moral judgments and their conduct.
But how do you do that without law? Okay, so which came first then? Henry, do we have public policy changing behavior, which then changes our opinion about that? Or do we have the culture just change those opinions? And then, I mean, now it's getting kind of confused. I've always been the one that buys that the law helps us know how to live, all the way back to the law of God. I mean, my goodness, if he didn't say don't kill, maybe I think a few people I would prefer not on this side of eternity.
Getting back to some of the things Dr. Fagan said, if we're going to have a free society, this is the sort of thing that has to happen consensually before the laws are formed. It cannot happen by imposition from the law to create a majority consensus that did not exist beforehand. One can create that consensus, but not in a free or democratic way. So that if we want to maintain our freedoms, we want to maintain what makes America unique, then what we need to do is persuade people and carve out the space to allow us to persuade.
Doctor, I need to hear from you, Dr. Allen, because I think the opposite is what has happened. The people didn't say they wanted this stuff. In fact, we see some cases where the people voted against some of what we're seeing today, and yet they've gone through courts to get what some call the left ideology.
Very exactly correct. I want to give a very brief example of this, referring to the COVID-19 crisis that we've just lived through. What have we done? We've struggled with government's ability to persuade us to act a certain way.
Right.
Social distance, wear a mask, wash your hands. And we pretend that depends on science and technology.
Right.
We've forgotten that those same things were present in the Levitical Code and transmitted securely. Why can we not do what was done in the Levitical Code?
Right.
Because we've abandoned any expectation that people can be held responsible.
Wow. And then I'm wondering who's to blame. Are the legislators to blame to assume that we don't know how to self-govern?
Yes.
You're saying yes.
Yes.
So because I see this in particular in the Black community, it's starting with a set of assumptions that these folks don't know how to self-govern. So we must build a society that tries to answer all of these moral questions. Let me ask you this, Henry, about some of the comments that you've just made. In this dual society, is there, in 30 seconds, a way that we can cure it? Can we live in a shared space when you have a secular people and people that get up and go to church on Sunday morning and believe it?
When you have two conflicts of worldviews, there's only 3 or 4 ways to deal with it. You either separate so that each have their own space, you have one dominate the other, or you have people who come together and form a third new worldview that takes the best from both, that both can agree to. There's really no other way to deal with this.
War, you forgot war, number 4.
No, I didn't forget war, but I wanted to be a little optimist. That's the aspect of domination, which is, so you do one of those 3 things, and right now, I think probably the best way is to create that space.
That third.
Which can either be
the
federal,
2 spaces.
or that's what I mean. It's the 2 spaces.
Okay.
But ultimately, if we want to be one country, we have to have something that we can agree upon, and that has to be something that represents the best of both viewpoints. It cannot be the domination of one.
Okay, so that might be where we're going a little bit. I've got my signal that we have to get up out of here. And that's interesting because when you think about the limited role of government, which is what a lot of conservatives and libertarians argue for, it seems like it would clean up a lot of this mess. Much of what we're dealing with in these questions is because government has decided to be in absolutely every area of our life, which you're bringing up, Dr. Allen. I really appreciate that. When we come back, we're going to look at another aspect of these same questions because we need to know, is there a left grab for power? The second space that Dr. Olson was telling us about, where people are trying to dominate others in our society with their worldview. We have to address this because I kind of like number 1, you live, I live, I want to go to church, but I want to believe the Bible, and I don't want you to arrest me for doing that, and I don't want you to then demand of me to your worldview. So let's see if we can do that when we get back.